Hello and welcome to the history of the Metacrisis. Today I have the great pleasure and honor to host Dr. Wim Naudé, PhD, who is an economist and graduate of the University of Warwick. He has been a lecturer and research officer at the University of Oxford, senior research fellow at the World Institute for Development Economics Research at the United Nations University in Finland, professor in business and entrepreneurship at Maastricht University, and professor in economics at the University College Cork in Ireland. He is fellow of the African Studies Centre, University of Leiden, the Netherlands, visiting professor in technology and development at RWTH Aachen University in Germany, distinguished visiting professor in economics at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa, and an AI expert affiliated with the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development at the AI Policy Observatory in France. In 2022 and 2023, he was a top 10 candidate for the Dutch Green Left Party, the GroenLinks, in the country's provincial parliamentary election. In his early career, as a member of the liberation movement in South Africa, Wim served as an elected councillor for the African National Congress in the first democratic local government in the country from 2000 to 2006. His scholarly works deals with the relationship between technological innovation, entrepreneurship, trade, and economic growth and development. This work has been published widely in major peer-reviewed scientific journals, and he has been editor and co-editor and author of several academic books published by, among others, Palgrave Macmillan, Oxford University Press, Routledge, Springer, and Cambridge University Press. According to Stanford University and Elsevier's Global Ranking of Scientists, 2022 and 2023, Wim is among the top 2% of scientists in the world. He lives in Maastricht, the Netherlands. So, without further ado, please welcome with me Wim Naudé. Wim, welcome to the history of the Metacrisis.
Thank you very much, Alexandros. Great to be with you.
How is the weather in Maastricht?
Well, it's grey and drizzly. Hopefully, we'll get some of the sunshine from Greece soon.
Unfortunately, today we also have a lot of rains.
Which is a good thing, I guess, for you, right?
Yes, exactly. We didn't have enough rains this year. We didn't see a snow this year. Not at all. During Christmas time, we have had 25 degrees. This is madness.
Yes, that's madness, complete madness, yes.
So, would you like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself? What was your past? You are also a nomad. I've seen you teach in several universities. You've been all around the world. Tell us a little bit about your past.
Yes, so thank you very much for talking to me, Alexandros. It's great to talk on your podcast. Well, yes, as you allude to, I'm a kind of an international drifter of sorts. I was born in South Africa and I grew up. I left in the early 1990s for the United Kingdom. I returned later in the 1990s. Also, I was kind of like called back by the political changes taking place in the country. And I served for a while as an African National Congress councillor on a district municipality. And back in 2005, the South African Minister of Finance, Trevor Manuel, also asked me to serve on the Council of Statistics South Africa to help lead also the transformation of how economic statistics were collected in the country. I qualified as a development economist, so in short, I do have, as an international drifter, lots of different hats on. But basically, what I'm concerned while I'm wearing these hats are to focus on what drives economic development. How can we make the world economically better for everyone? Looking at inclusive development, also looking at environmental development. How can we make it sustainable? How can we create a fairer society? And underlying this fairer, just society, economics is very important. And so my odyssey has been one of, growing up in a country with huge inequalities, huge injustices, working for a long time in a continent that is still, facing a huge amount of economic challenges and need to catch up in many respects, and is still struggling, millions of people every day to put, just food on the table and find some security, So I think as long as all of these injustices prevail in a world that is able to function perfectly well and can function without all of these injustices and poverty, I think we should be asking ourselves, what can we do? What are the causes of underdevelopment, of poverty, of inequality, of environmental and ecological overshoot, and how to fix the system and how to make it a better system, and also to understand where the system is going. And so I found that a very fascinating odyssey that I'm on, and I think it links up also, with the aims that you have for the meta-crisis problem. Are these problems and crises interlinked? Why do we have difficulty solving these? We have seen progress, but we have also seen sometimes frustratingly lack of progress, and sometimes even regressive movements. I remember in the early 1990s being very ecstatic. Nelson Mandela was released from prison. The Berlin Wall had collapsed. It seems the Cold War was over. The nuclear sword that had been hanging over people's heads seemed to have been lifted. The world seems to be on a positive trajectory. And now, 30 years later, we are talking about polycrisis, meta-crisis, one crisis after another. So something seriously had gone wrong. We had expected a wholly different world. Some people had called it an entrepreneurial economy with, lots of small firms thriving, the digital economy, the internet bringing humanity together. And it seems that it is just at the opposite has happened. So I really think that there is a meta problem, a meta crisis that we need to understand, and we need to understand and solve that, fairly soon, in my view. So that's just a little bit of background, as a development economist, what I am interested in.
That's very interesting, very fascinating, your life story. But let's dive into the real subjects of our discussion. You have published a book where you call both green growth on the one end, and let me just read the economic growth and societal collapse, beyond green growth and degrowth fairy tales. So you actually call the two end of the spectrum fairy tales. Why is that? What is green growth? What is degrowth? And why are they fairy tales? Because we see a lot of people believing in these ideas.
All right, so let's take one step back. The question of sustainable economic development, if we look at it in a very long-term perspective, so we take this bird's eye view, or we can even imagine, some alien sitting on the moon and observing the planet Earth over a long period of time. And for most of the 300 odd years that there has been, modern humans, on the planet, the economy has basically been stagnant or, stable. There hasn't been really economic growth for 300,000 years. And then suddenly something happened around 1820, which led 2 centuries or so of exponential economic growth. So with exponential economic growth, I'd say 2% per year, the size of the economy doubles every 35 years. And so what we have seen is this immense increase in world GDP, or gross domestic product, or total production in the world, just doubling very fast every couple of years. And together with that, also population growth had also grown super exponentially. So these trends are completely bizarre in the long term. Well, why did it happen, and is it sustainable, and what triggered it? And it's led to a large literature about the reasons why we had this growth explosion and why we had this transformation of the modern world. So modern humans are about 6,000 times richer in terms of income than our ancestors were at the end of the previous ice age. We use, I think one of the calculations showed that we use as much energy today, the average person, that would be equivalent if we were back in Athens or in Maastricht in 1800, we would need to have about 60 people working 24/7 for us to be able to do all the things we do today with the energy that we are consuming. So something abnormal, anomalous happened in the last 2 to 3 centuries, which we measure. One way that we measure it, not a perfect way, but we measure it in GDP, and we saw that this GDP concept, this growth, had expanded. Now it brought wonderful things with it. It brought with it wealth, security, longer lives, better education. Also, we are much more tolerant. One of the things that we always have to remember is that 100 or 200 years ago, people were taken into slavery. Corporal punishment was real. Women were completely repressed. So our values also changed drastically in the last 200 years. We've become more tolerant. We've become more open in the society. We've also, in many indicators, become more peaceful. Right. So there's lots of great things that have happened with this growth of the economy that we see. But what we also now,
it is progress. Because I don't like people seeing all the negativities.
No, absolutely not. So, and many people today aspire in the world to live like Europeans or Americans, with high per capita income, with good jobs, with good security. So these are not things that are anti what humans want. To have a good life is perfectly acceptable, and people should strive for that and do strive for it. And this trajectory that we have been on has been able to do that for millions of people. So we can actually track how many millions of people have escaped from poverty, even in the last 20 or 30 years. Now, so this is the good thing. Something miraculously happened, and through that we're, as humans, able to walk on the moon, and we are able to have this wonderful communication, instantaneously across the world. So for many people living 200 years ago, this would be like science fiction. It'd be completely like magic. What's going on? So we should appreciate that something out of the ordinary had happened to humans. But it came with, as we realize now, there's also a price to pay for it. There are lots of negative, unplanned, unintended consequences. There is also the fact that we don't know where it is going. What kind of process have we embarked on? Is this kind of like some inevitable process of evolution by natural selection, which selects for intelligence and for information to grow? Is it some aspect of the physical world, the universe, that we don't comprehend properly? So and some people have speculated, that like the sun is a singularity of energy, so maybe the planet Earth is a singularity of information. So are we basically seeing an accumulation of information and patterns? And is perhaps information much bigger in the physics of information than we had realized? Maybe we don't understand things properly as well. So we don't understand where this process is going. And it may be that this process may be something that has been so unique that it's not sustainable and that it would collapse. We know that there are cycles in nature as well. We see that nothing lives forever. Everything comes to an end at some stage. So it may pretty well be that this wonderful ride that we have been on, or this remarkable ride, is also coming to an end. So how do we deal with the negative consequences, and what do we do about the future? Understanding what we are on, and so in that context, there has been responses, and two of the responses currently being discussed, for instance, in Europe, where I'm working a lot, is on the one hand green growth. So that's kind of like official World Bank, OECD, European Union have programs on sustainability, based also very much on IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, which looks at all the science, to basically say, well, how can we get growth that puts less carbon into the atmosphere, that maybe uses less materials, that are more circular, that have less of a footprint and an ecological imprint on society. And the general gist of this approach is to say, well, through technology, we can decouple this process of economic growth and the size of the economy. We can decouple that through technology from the negative impact on society. And so, for instance, if we have right technologies, and part of that technology is also social technology, like taxes on carbon. So if we have a high enough tax on carbon, maybe people and companies will internalize and not externalize the negative effect and there will be less carbon emitted, and it will also encourage innovation and substitution effect. So that's the traditional mainstream green economic growth approach. But then some people have been growingly critical about that, and I think also with good reason and also justified. And this has been emerging already since the 1970s. There has been a little bit of concerns about it, but this really started in Europe in 2008 during the global financial crisis in Paris with the kind of like first degrowth conference. And the degrowth movement is very critical of the green growth, saying, well, you will never decouple economic growth from the environment and the ecology, and that therefore what needs to be done is the size of the economy needs to be shrunk. Some of the proponents have said we need to de-develop the West in a way, bring that GDP per capita is too high and that it should be lower, and that the only way that we can prevent the ecological overshoot is to consume less, produce less, live simpler types of lives. And they've come up with certain prescriptions and policies of, say, that would be consistent with such a type of a scenario. So that's the kind of like two approaches that I allude to in this title that you have just mentioned. And my own view is that I sympathize with both of these approaches in a large degree. I think we should not underestimate technology. But I also sympathize with degrowth analysis that there is problems with the green growth assumptions of technology, that the decoupling seems to me still a very far way off. But I also see in terms of I see the diagnosis of degrowth as being fundamentally right, but I see the policies that they want and the approach to the problem that has been identified. I see that as also problematic and not being able to do what needs to be done. Which leaves me with a bit of a pessimistic conclusion that both of the approaches that we currently have, degrowth and green growth, neither of these seem, in my view, very soon to be able to really solve the ecological downsides of the growth trajectory that human society has been on.
And especially as the time frame is closing fast, because as we've been discussing before starting recording this podcast, time is the only material that we don't have enough. And right now it is exhausting in a fast pace.
Yeah.
This is I believe, a central point that neither of these agendas take into account. How much time are we left with?
Yes, the feedback systems that we work in an economy and in political societies are very slow. We do something and we get feedback on the results in a very slow way, in a very indirect way. Our measurements are not instantaneous, and then if we have to react to that problem, it takes a very long period of time for various reasons. One of them is the infamous collective action problem, which we suffer from, but the feedback is very slow. So in terms of monitoring the environment, monitoring what we are doing, measuring it, we are in a way walking in the dark.
And we also lack the ability to think systemically. We always seem to not to see the second, third, fourth order effects, or we realize them after a couple of centuries, as we do right now with ecological overshoot.
Indeed. So that's part of what I would like to call the cognitive biases or the bounded rationality of humans, is that we have lots of cognitive biases, which makes sorting and identifying problems very difficult, and also moving to a new perception of what's the real problem, because we get as humans very attached to our own narratives of what's going on in the world, and we tend not to have a scientific understanding of the world. We really need to drill into our thoughts to make ourselves scientific, and we need to put up all these edifices to make sure that we are thinking scientifically, because if we don't do that, we tend not to think in terms of science and in terms of really what I would call, the underlying logic, but we tend to think in terms of narratives, in terms of stories. And so if you can tell a pretty convincing story, even if that story is completely divorced from underlying reality, large swaths of humans will go along with that and subscribe to that. And that's often the problem. If you are dealing with a very specific, meta crisis, where probably we need more type of scientific thinking, kind of like narrative thinking may actually work against us.
Yes, I agree with you, but also science is a narrative. We need. You've been writing to me that we need to have scientific humility as well as humility in everything else. We know that our blind spots are quite huge. We only see 0.0035% of the light spectrum. But we tend to understand this as the reality. Well, our perception maybe and our biological infrastructure doesn't help us to really grasp reality.
No. And we're doing a bad job of that, but I'm all for science, right? So let me say that what the issue with science is, and this is an important point, I think maybe again to stress, is that science is not a set of beliefs. Science is a process. I don't believe that E is equal to MC squared. I see that as a description of how reality works, our best description at the moment, but it can change at any moment, because we can find, the process can find, just like the scientific process found that while Newton had a good description of reality, it only applied in a specific, part, and that was superseded by Einstein's general theory of relativity. But who knows in the future what kind of advances we can make, because, science is a process of reckoning with the fact that our brains wants to fool us all the time. So we need to realize that we are fighting a game against our perceptions. As you say, we don't see the light spectrum. We have only 6 senses to comprehend the whole of reality, and I think we would be foolish to think that's the only reality that exists that we can perceive. So we need to reckon with the fact that our brains try to fool us, and that's why science is a process of error correction. Now, of course, philosophers like Nietzsche and others have spotted the problem, that if a society moves to that realization of science, you can't really believe in science, you trust the process, but what science found is always provisional. So that's not something that you can base a belief on. Traditional religions were kind of like, these are the facts that you have to believe, and this is how they are, the immutable truths. They are forever the same. And science has come up and says, no, nothing that we know is forever the same. It's all provisional knowledge that we have. It can change. We only know that we need to have a critical process of error correction, and that's the best way forward. So it never replaced the kind of idea that there is something immutable that never changes that we can believe in. And for humans, that has been a very difficult process to say that, well, nothing is immutable. There's no solid reality or solid laws or beliefs that we can take forward. So suddenly everything has become, almost like without meaning. It was Nietzsche's fear that Western society would become nihilistic and not be able to survive the death of God, and that remains a problem in the world today, and something which I think one needs to deal with, because we need the science to go forward. Whether it's in the degrowth or the green growth.
But the general public is not scientifically trained. People need to believe. People need to have. This is an internal need of our psyche, of our. I call it psyche because that's the terminology. I don't believe in something that is internal to us, that doesn't have a biological infrastructure. But Viktor Frankl also believed in the loss of meaning in our current realities. Right now, all religions are collapsing. Basic political beliefs, ideologies are collapsing. People don't have somewhere to grab themselves on. And this is a general problem, because especially within our information environment, which has also had, it faced an exponential growth during the last 3 decades. We see all these different echo chambers getting created, where people tend to isolate themselves, recycling the same beliefs without even being able to discuss different kind of ideas. So how do we go over this in order to find the common ground? Yes, science creates this common ground, this common understanding, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of investment in personal development, a lot of societal investment that doesn't seem to be coming. So this is the meta crisis for me.
Indeed. Yes. So this is why I'm also in my work, in my book, I also describe the decline in science as a big threat, to our society, precisely when we need more science and more innovation and more creative thinking, including creative thinking, about what are our moral systems, our perception of ourselves in the universe, what is the nature of reality, what's the meaning of life, how do we contribute to that? Those type of discussions, we need to have that evolved and be creative. I mean, are we still in the thrall of ideas that people had 2 or 3 centuries or 10 centuries ago? That is my fear. I even see, in these debates about Adam Smith versus Karl Marx, and I ask my students, what, you are thinking about a thinker that lived 200 years ago? You are still in the thrall of a 19th century thinker about economic systems? Come on, haven't we have some progress, some innovation in thinking about economics?
We're talking about the industrial society, while right now we live in a post-information society.
Yes. So, but I think we need, but we live in a post. People talk about the post appellation. I think also maybe too quickly. I think there is still, again, it comes back to what you said about the epistemic humility that one needs to have, is that from the vantage point where we are perceiving changes in our society, we are probably not perceiving the bigger wave on which we are moving. You can only see that, in my view, with sufficient hindsight. Like we are now looking at the industrial revolution that occurred in the beginning of the 19th century, end of the 18th century. Certainly the people living during that time didn't say, well, we're in the middle of the industrial revolution. It was something that was figured out with hindsight. So I'm sure that, in 100 or 200 years, people will refer to the period that we are living now as something completely different. Said, well, look at these people. They were foolish. They thought they were living in the information age. Ha ha ha. They're surprised.
It's true.
I think somebody once said, and maybe it comes to another point that we can touch on. Somebody once said that maybe in future people look back at this age as the hydrocarbon age. Not the computer age, but the age where we had lots of fossil fuel energy. And of course, it cannot last forever. So, maybe this is what makes the last 200 years distinctive, is not the ICT, but really the hydrocarbons on which we have built the civilization.
Well, yes, seeing it systemically, have you found the common factor that is driving all these different crises right now?
No, I haven't. I see some broad, trends that I think to some extent underlies some things, but I think I find it difficult to have a, one kind of like magic silver bullet explaining everything that goes on. It could just be that we are more aware of changes occurring than we were before. So I won't eliminate the possibility that we have a kind of like a biased perspective on the changes that are affecting us. But no, I don't see one central problem. But they could be a few candidates that I would say candidates for possible type of deep underlying structural sources. I call it in a new work that I'm working on. I'm calling it sources of rot in society. So any society or any structure that, if you want to call it that, you can build the most beautiful house, but at some stage, the roof is going to rot away. The structures, the support structures are going to rot away. You have all kinds of rot, and rot is something that accumulates over time. very slowly. You don't always realize that. And so I think part of the meta-crisis underlying problem is that there are certain sources of rot in modern society that are slowly creeped up. So let's take just an example. It's not necessarily the perfect example, but just one that's maybe foremost on people's minds, given the European Union. So there's European elections coming up later this year, and so people could say that when the European Union was created some decades ago, it was really a great idea. It really helped solve, immediate problems of peace and reconstruction and development and cooperation in Europe, and it did a really great job, and it was needed. But, fast forward a couple of decades, it may be the case that some of these aspects of the EU has stretched past its sell-by date, and that rot has set into the system. So what I mean by that is that systems don't stay pristine and fit for purpose. The purpose changed, the background changed, and so institutions may become maladjusted to the environment in which it has moved into. And the question then is, how do you change such a structure? How do you get rid of the rot? Do you cut out the rot and renew it? Or does one wait for the whole system to implode and build something new in its place? So I don't think we know exactly how that is being done. In my field, I've looked, a lot at businesses, how businesses are created, how they grow, and eventually how they die. And what we do know is that businesses, which are kind of like humans putting together their different talents in an internal organization, which, Ronald Coase got the Nobel Prize for describing how we internalize these transactions in an organizational form, because the market cannot solve all of these different, individual transactions because of, transaction costs, etc. So we build organizations, firms, etc. But these things never last, forever. So typically big firms last. Maybe the longest firm I think recently died off. It was a Japanese firm. I think it was 500 years old. But even the mighty Dutch East Indian Company, which in its time, it was created in 1601, so 400 odd years ago. At its stage, its market value was larger than Amazon and Google today put together. So it was really the Amazon and Google put together of the 17th century. It's disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. Now the question is, one of these big companies, after 100 years or 200 years, what happens? People studying these organizational theories of change all come to the conclusion that somehow along the line they start losing the plot. Somewhere along the line they start making mistakes. They start becoming less innovative, they start becoming less entrepreneurial, they're out of touch with times, and eventually they rot from the inside. So we can say with quite certainty, that the big companies today, the Googles and the Amazons, will not be here in a century or two from now. Now the question is, what these companies are all that tries to live forever is they try to say, well, can we become strategic? Can we reinvent ourselves? Can we become new? How do we renew ourselves? And I often find that they can't. The best way is to close them down and create something else. Some new firms come in and you get the dynamic. We see this on the scale of civilizations as well. We could argue that modern Western civilization grew up in the vacuum that was left by the Roman Empire. If the Roman Empire did not collapse, we would not have seen the rise of the modern West, perhaps. So that's also a perspective that we need to keep in mind, because we just don't understand at the moment, where we are heading.
I totally agree with you, and as a matter of fact, also empires don't last forever. Well, I live in a country that used to be Byzantium for 1,000 years. It does not exist anymore.
No,
everything comes and goes. But in my point of view, the fact that we as humans develop progress in our understanding of nature should help us at this difficult point in time that we are, while what I observe is that it actually makes it harder for us to understand our predicament, harder for us to discuss the very problems that we face today. We seem to try to find solutions with all time thinking for new kind of problems. And there is a mismatch there.
Mm-hmm. There is a mismatch, and often we tend to make things worse. So at the moment, what I'm really trying to figure out is how just to convince people not to make a current bad situation even worse, and that often is also a problem.
yesterday, Aramco announced the biggest profits in its history, and actually in the history of the market system, $121 billion. And it was in a single year. It is more profits than Google, Amazon, and all of the techno giants, the techno feudalists that you call them. Actually, Varoufakis calls them put together. And this happens in a year that we have devoted a lot of time and energy talking about the coming environmental collapse, about overshoot, where the COP28 happened in their country. So it was actually a lot of information going to this country that is creating actually a havoc through this 121 billion euros for which the market celebrated. So this is for me, it's a clear sign of a mismatch.
Yes, sure. Yes, that's we have a big mismatch between the, on the one hand, we would like to have all the fossil fuels and the benefits that the fossil fuels are bringing, but we also don't know how to properly deal with the negative consequences. And certainly the way in which we have structured the nation states to make laws and legislation to internalize these negative externalities which these industries are causing, these are based on the Westphalian model, which again relates back to 1648, the Peace of Westphalia in Europe, which brought an end to the religious strife in Europe by coming up with the concept of sovereignty. A nation state is sovereign. You know what the nation state does in its borders, it's nothing to do with its neighbors. And that principle, you know, that we have is the principle on which the United Nations is built. So we have 190 odd countries in the world based on a 17th century notion of sovereignty, where they are becoming together and they have to deal with global problems, which are really global in nature. So it's a system that's not designed to tackle the problems that we are now facing. It was designed to tackle a 17th century problem. And so if you think about the corporate structures that we have, the stock exchange was invented in 1601 in the Netherlands for having ships sail across the world, but in a way providing them with insurance because they had to build the ships and they weren't sure they're going to come back with a cargo. So they sent out subscriptions to people, to buy part of the stock in these ships that were coming back. And that solved a 17th century problem of trade. But the structures that we have taken from that, the corporate structures, the shareholding structures, the structure of loans and interest, the financial system, these things are still basically, the same as they were in the 17th century. I mean, most of modern banking, Arjun Chang has written very nicely about this. He calls it the dark origins of modern institutions. So he talks about, for instance, the financial city of London, the financial capital, which was, as he describes it in some ways, also involved in kind of like circling money through the system. Part of that money also came from the pirateers, which got licenses from the royalty to be able to to rob ships of the opposing countries on the high seas. And where did all this wealth goes? Had to create a city of London with the financial infrastructure for that. So yes, you are quite correct. We have a mismatch that many of our institutions and organizations have been created in times and for problems that we don't face anymore. And this again comes back to my question of the rot. The rot seeps into these organizations over time, and it brings up to the question: how do we reform these, or not?
Well, you also speak in your book about our global noosphere. The fact that through information society, information technology, we have created a way of communicating in real time, in very fast time intervals that are unprecedented. We have never had the ability to send messages to the other part of the world in real time in the past. So we actually can communicate with each other at global scale. This creates the global village, but in the same time, we see that people are getting more separated. So how these two different tendencies work together? How can we escape it in order to create at least the possibility of listening to each other?
Well, yeah. So listening is a discussion, it's a debate. It's somebody says something and something react on that, and that leads again to some other thoughts being formed, etc. So discussion can take time. I don't know if we are in a way already having that discussion through this idea of the noosphere. So the noosphere is an old idea, but it's just basically saying that we have the geosphere, the planet, the rocks. We have the biosphere, the life. We have the atmosphere, and the argument has been made that we are now in the process of creating a noosphere, which is basically like the digital part of the world, which could be seen as a kind of like a planetary brain, a collective intelligence that are being created, and that has an impact on the rest of the planet, right? So the noosphere will affect the atmosphere, it will affect
the hydrosphere and
the geosphere. So the examples have been given of say for instance new innovations coming up through the noosphere, which transforms the geosphere from minerals into metallic products. It's like the system transforms itself from the outside in, so to speak. So this is kind of like a very far off idea that's being mooted. I think that we are still maybe in too early stages to say that there really exists such a noosphere, but I think we can say with some authority at least that some form of collective intelligence is currently in the process of being established.
Emerging.
Like I've my mobile phone here, but through this now connected, say with large language models or research engines, I can tap into the collective information and intelligence of all human beings, for a very long time. So as much information as we have, I can immediately tap into that.
Yes, but in the same time, you also have a lot of misinformation and disinformation.
Right.
And
so
you are a very trained person, an accomplished professional scientist, and you can maybe sometimes distinguish between disinformation and misinformation, or you can try to find what is truth. Because if you cannot really define truth, and right now we live in environments that we have all these different post-truths being published, having a lot of budget behind them, with enormous manpower supporting completely mad ideas sometimes. But then you have the ordinary people trying to access this noosphere and finding no truth in there.
Yes, yeah, that's. I mean, Caleb Scharf has written a very nice book on the data ohm. So he calls it, a similar type of idea. He calls the data ohm, and he says that just like a human brain, which contains information and synapses and neural pathways that can store information, that can learn from information that's being put into it. So in the data ohm or the noosphere, you have the same type of process, starting to emerge. But just as the human brain do have cognitive dissonances and also can get diseased, so you can also perhaps see the data ohm or the noosphere as getting diseased and getting infected. So certainly we can see these infections, in cyberspace. We have cybercrime, we have viruses, literally computer viruses. But we also have memes that are not necessarily truthful. And these things are driven in a way by evolutionary logic. Just as evolution will, for instance, certain type of features will be passed on through evolution, not because it makes sense, but because it allows survival. So you can have ideas multiply online in memes, not because they are truthful, but because they survive somehow, because they serve some form of purpose. And this is the really difficult part where I think we don't know enough about how information evolves and what's really the purpose. Is it really about reality and about truth? Donald Hoffman has these experiments that he's done on evolutionary game theory, where he asks, do we see reality as it really is? And the simulations found that in fact the best option evolutionary wise over time to survive is to fool yourself, to be able not to see reality as it is. That can actually be a disadvantage for survival over time. So so that kind of like is something which and that's his theory, and he's talked about that, and not everybody agrees with him on his interpretation of reality and truth. But we have to ask ourselves, is truth something that has got survival value over the long run, or are we kind of like living in a universe where maybe there is some evolutionary benefit for a particular species to fool itself in some stages? And we see these type of strategies of misinformation and disinformation in nature all the time. You have butterflies that disguises themselves. They look like the branch on which they are sitting. So they are not truthful about their own nature. They try to convince whoever is flying by that they are just an inanimate piece of bark or branch, and that creates a survival value. The butterflies that are best able to lie about their underlying nature are actually doing better. So it propagates the species. And so we should expect that in human affairs as well, that the humans that can use cyberspace most effectively to lie, to create false narratives about themselves, may actually have a survival benefit, which is perhaps not such a nice way to look at it. It has fundamental moral and other concerns for us going forward.
Well, yes, I love this idea. Some years of my life I devoted to a project called the Human Connectome Project, where we started there and at the end they finished. I was out some years earlier, but they managed to connect 100 billion euros of the human brain. And we learned a lot of things about ourselves, about the evolution of the brain, about the evolution of neurons, of synapses, and how actually the whole infrastructure works. And we know right now that from the age of 3 till the age of 6, the human brains develops exponentially. From 7 to 10 billion neurons, it goes to 240 billion neurons, but then it understands that it is not going to need in the environment about 150 of them. So it goes through the process called pruning, and it gets rid of it. So this is actually what I see happening also with us as a species. If you understand human as a neuron of the noosphere, then we're in the process of exponential growth right now. But what I'm afraid of is that a great pruning is coming. And we see that through the collapse of the environment, through all these different geopolitical tensions, wars, coming famine, soil depletion. What is your take about the future? Are you a pessimist or an optimist? What is your P-doom, this number that is going around these days?
Alexandros, to be honest, I don't know. Some days I'm optimistic and some days I'm more pessimistic.
You don't have a final number.
I think I tend to be optimistic, in my personal life as well. So I tend to perhaps have hope that somehow there is something that we have missed in analyzing our predicament, which will mean that the story will have a happy ending. Sometimes I'm thinking, maybe I'm too realistic, and if I'm really realistic, then I think, well, of course, maybe it will not last. Maybe these problems, we have spotted the fundamental problems too late. And we are not capable, given our organizations and our cognitive apparatus, to solve these predicaments. And we will probably go through a phase of drastic changes in the future. Whether it will be in my lifetime, I don't think so. But then again, I'm also very wary that nobody has ever been correct in predicting the future, and we should not, take from history, try to extrapolate into the future. That never works. There will always be something completely different. So I don't know. I think I'm quite happy to say that I don't know. And if I knew, then I wouldn't have anything to keep me awake at night thinking about what's going on and how to make sense of the world. And that's partly also fun, to make sense of the world. It's also, we talked about the sense of meaning. People feel that they often don't have meaning in life and that things is really difficult and there's all these kind of like crisis. And I think that's really also, philosophers had it correct already 2,000-3,000 years ago, right? In my view, if you think about, Eastern philosophical thinking, from Buddhism right through, the central message that comes from that is that, reality is not what it seems. There's a lot of suffering in the world, but it all will pass because, life is very brief, existence is very brief, all things are all the time changing. So in that kind of like reality that we have as humans already understood for at least 3,000 years that has been documented, the message is, don't worry too much. Try to make the world a better place, try to alleviate suffering as much as you can, but realize that you are never going to change it. There's always going to be suffering in the world. There's also going to be problems. Rather see these problems as challenges to be overcome. Nelson Mandela always also said that, after you've climbed one mountain, there's just another one that's in front of you to climb again. You never, life is one problem to be solved after another. It would be foolish to expect, as many Eastern philosophical traditions also teaches us, to expect a completely peaceful, happy, stable life. Maybe that would even be boring for us, So we should embrace the problems in a way because they shape us. They allow us to see what we are able to do. Marcus Aurelius wrote fantastic meditations almost 2,000 years ago. A really amazing book that he wrote in which he basically, took everything that life could throw at him and said, well, this is an opportunity for me to see how I deal with these challenges. So maybe we should see these challenges that we face and perhaps even our own demise as a human civilization. Maybe we should see that also as something which we could draw something positive from.
Okay, let me take you to your work at OECD. You work with artificial intelligence, the big promise on the one hand, or the big threat on the other hand. What is your work all about? How is AI ethics involved in the process of developing this technology? And what are the business realities of the sector? Because right now, one of the great dangers, I believe, is not coming through AI per se on its own right, but from the people that are handling the business of AI, which are a tiny minority of the planet that seems to control the whole political spectrum, economic realities, social factors, the whole today.
Yes. So I mentioned that I'm an economist by training, development economist, but I've had a very strong mathematical, statistical, and data background. Already starting in the 1990s, I was interested in building computable general equilibrium models, which is basically large mathematical models based on huge data sets. That was using the big data of the 1990s that was available then. So I've always been very interested in how one can simulate economic aspects, using data and mathematics. So I've always been interested in that. But I've been moreover interested in how these type of technologies impact on society, how it, like you said, how companies use that in their business models, how that affects people's productivity, how it helps with redistribution or distribution of economic gains, etc. And so a couple of years ago, precisely because of the rise of AI, I wrote a piece called The Hyperhysteria of AI, going beyond the hype and hysteria. And that was back in 2019. The piece is still online. It's been read quite a lot since then. And then it was back then it was kind of like a little bit strange. People were saying to me, maybe you are too pessimistic about artificial intelligence. It will really change the world, was the feeling back then, at least. And it seems now, after 4 or 5 years, that most of the arguments I think I made back then still holds, still valid. I think we are now realizing that there has indeed been a lot of hype about AI. A lot of the benefits in terms of productivity and economic growth haven't materialized. I've even written a piece during COVID to show how completely useless artificial intelligence was against the one of the major problems and challenges that the world faced, and how it actually in some cases even made things worse. Again, that paper has been downloaded quite a few thousand times, and so I think the hype now is clear that there has been hype. The same is about hysteria. There was also from the beginning people who believed that AI will take all the jobs. There will be a techno job apocalypse. And there were people who also believed that AI would spell the end of the world. There's even a paper published a few years ago which listed about 25 ways in which AI could kill off humanity. And I again said that the hysteria is also a little bit going too far. And in fact, if we push the hysteria too much, there could be a backlash from the public saying, this is a dangerous thing, shut it down, don't do any further research on it, which I said is also going too far, because you actually want better technologies, and the potential for AI is indeed important. So I said we should take a more middle type of road to AI, saying that AI can deliver benefits, but it's not going to be the be-all, the panacea for everything. It's going to be a useful technology, and it's also not going to be, existential threat to humanity. But it does have problems. There can be really awful AI. It is really there's lots of safety issues with AI that needs to be solved. So, I was arguing for that type of middle of the road approach to AI, and so subsequent work I've been doing has been relating on basically mathematically looking at how consistent are the claims that have been made for AI. So one claim has been recently that there would be explosive economic growth. There's really been a paper put forward saying it's possible that the world economy could grow at 30% or more per year, if we deploy AI, especially if we have artificial general intelligence. And so I wrote a paper just published by Institute for Study of Labor Economics, basically showing mathematically that you need lots of assumptions and lots of heroic assumptions about the sizes of the parameters in your economy to do that. And if we look at actual data on those parameters that we have from the United States economy, it seems that we are very far away from coming close to having even substantial economic growth from AI. In fact, in one of my papers with a colleague, we showed that it's quite possible to have quite good progress in AI, but actually a decline in labor productivity, a decline in economic growth. Of course, this is not something which people wanting to hype AI likes hearing. But if you look at the actual productivity figures in the West, Robert Solow, the Nobel Prize winner, already some time ago says that we can see the ICT revolution everywhere, but in the statistics. And so we can see the AI revolution everywhere, except in the productivity statistics. We can see it, as you mentioned, in the profit statistics of some of these big digital platform companies, which indeed have a dominating effect. And this domination is indeed a problem. And I think Yanis Varoufakis has a very good point in alerting us to, this new digital property class that has arisen that owns all the digital infrastructure in which we are dealing with and on which we are trading. So I think that is really restricting innovation in the world. I think that's leading to greater inequality, and I really think that that poses substantial challenges to anti-competition policy, to anti-monopoly policies, to how do you deal with firms which can become too big to fail. We already have the bankers who have been too big to fail, and we saw in the global financial crisis, which is still with us. I again think that Varoufakis is quite correct in pointing out to the lingering dangers of the failed resolution of the global financial crisis. And now we have the big tech firms, which also seem almost to become too big to fail. And now with the wars, we are having the big armaments industries, which are rearming the world, which is making huge profits from arms, and which are now becoming almost too big to fail, because, the existential threat to Europe is that unless we arm too much, we will be finished. So we are creating, shooting ourselves in the foot as a society by creating these too big to fail companies, who are increasingly dominating and making obscene amounts of profits.
And this is the merging of these sectors, especially the weaponry sector and the artificial intelligence sector, which is coming. Right now, we know that a vast amount of research is made from the armies of the world. Actually exponentially shoots the dangers, because mutually assured destruction, while you have nuclear weapons on your hands, is for me a certainty if you insert artificial intelligence in the sector. A near certainty. I'm not so sure how we're going to manage with our fighting instincts as a species.
Yes, that's a kind of like a weapon which I'm not sure one should have. I mean, I think we have even exceeded our reach by having so many nuclear weapons on the planet. So I do think that the nuclear threat is way more serious than the artificial intelligence threat.
The merging is what I'm afraid most.
The merging would be a huge problem, like the merging of AI with some biological research or bioweapon research could even be of a magnitude even worse, because it may be even more difficult to detect if you go that route. The dangers that you point to now, Alexandros, is also why I'm kind of like saying we need to find a balance to harness the best of AI and avoid the safety issues, because it's a potentially good innovation in the method of innovation. And if we look at the rate of innovations in the last 30 to 50 years, it's declined. We are not such an innovative society as we think we are. And we need actually to have much better innovations. Part of the problem is that we are aging, so especially the West. The population, we have been expecting a population boom, and the problem is overpopulation. But the problem now seems to be that it's declining population and population stagnation. Companies find it difficult to find workers now. Young workers in Europe. The average age, I think, now in Europe and Canada is above 40 years of age. China is also aging, very, very fast. It's a major problem for their continued. And an older population tends to be less innovative, less entrepreneurial, doing less in terms of science, having also less children. So the population decline sets in much further. And also, if you have slower population growth, you have fewer Einsteins and Michelangelos and so forth being born that can make significant discoveries. So it's really, perhaps this is one of these mega crises that the world is actually facing, is that our engine of innovation is declining, is slowly drifting away. So we're creating, at least in Europe, this very old age society, which is basically on retirement. And what does it want to do? It wants to live in this post-growth world and maybe create a fortress Europe where it feels safe in this world, and it can basically, live the rest of its life in a peaceful retirement. This is what I'm afraid, is happening in Europe. So searching for innovative ways of really dealing with the world's problems seems to be slipping away as an urgent priority. And it means that, largely, if it continues, the West, Europe at least, will make smaller and smaller contribution constructively to try and help solve world problems.
You teach in a lot of universities, you have real access, and you are discussing with a lot of young people. How do young people of today feel the metacrisis? What is their grasp of reality? Do they feel the environmental threats, the geopolitical threats, their challenges through artificial intelligence? What is the feedback that you are getting, discussing these subjects with them?
It also differs, Alexandros, across the world. So I think people have different youth in different parts of the world, I think, are also having distinctly different viewpoints nowadays. It's interesting.
So the digital divide is really deep.
Yeah, it's a digital divide, and it's also partly it's the opposite of the digital divide as well. People everywhere in the world are very much aware now of how things are developing in other parts of the world. So you can live in any place in the world, and you know how people in Europe are living and how they are thinking and how they are approaching things, and you can see that some people are getting ridiculously rich and wealthy. While you can see that other people are dying every day because of war and poverty and hunger. So those type of pictures are much more visible to everybody in the world than they have been before. So it's the opposite of the digital divide kind of like effect, which has a different effect depending on where you are and how you are affected by these. So if you live in a rich Western country and you see hunger and migrants and climate catastrophes and conflict, you may feel it's time to put up the fences. It's time to be very defensive. You have a kind of like a more fearful approach. If you're on the other side, you may say, well, it's time to change. It's time to get up and stand up and change the system because it's unfair, and we see what is possible for us to achieve if we can do that. So you get a different type of feeling of how things should work out. But what I do think, again, is coming back to my question of the comparing now with the 1990s, when I was just as a young student getting into the labor market, getting out of studies and starting the labor market. It's a very optimistic time. I think today there is really much more pessimism among the youth, and they also feel like they are living in a world which is less permissionless type of world. It's kind of like there are so many rules, there are so many regulations, there are so many oversights. And coming back to the digital problems, everything you do is online. It's almost like the world never forgets. You can't make mistakes because it will never be forgotten. And I think that is also having a psychological effect. And we know, of course, what the psychological damage is also on young people today, of social media and of comparisons that are being made, and of people being driven even to suicide in many tragical cases by peer pressures through social media. So I certainly think that in that respect, I would say a negative trend in the last 20, 30 years.
Yes, I totally agree with you, but we cannot seem to come up with the right solutions. It was less than a month ago that a month and a half, that Mark Zuckerberg was at the US Congress apologizing for the suicides of young people, along with other social media operators. But nothing changed. After that, it's business as usual. So what is the message that we're transmitting to our societies, to our young people, to the future generations coming? When we spot the problem, we identify the problem, but we don't seem to come up with the right solutions.
Yes. Well, like I said, I think we identified the problem. I hope that what you've said now and what many other people are now saying, and that the message is being spread, that there is a kind of like a feeling going around that we should be addressing these possible digital dystopias. And I see a lot of groundswell against this. We also see a lot of people being very cognizant of the problems. There's lots of protests in Europe about all kinds of things. So people do feel that they are perceiving an injustice and that things need to change. I think maybe we want it to take place much faster than it can. Maybe the system doesn't allow these type of realizations that we find. Like I said, the feedback system that we have, the thermostat. My house has a thermostat. If the temperature declines, then the heating goes on automatically, and it goes on quite fast. I think our thermostat and our systems in which we give feedback to what happens is much slower.
So we need to upgrade our systems. For me, right now, democracy is also challenged all around the world. We seem to not come up with the right solutions. People are not participating. But for me, the answer is more democracy, not less. Right now, we have the technologies to involve people more in the democratic process, to make the city. Well, in ancient Athens, people were they were throwing the ballot for who is going to participate in the government. Maybe we should take that back. Maybe we should upgrade our democratic systems, not devalue them. Because yes, as long as the elites, the people governing the economy and the political institutions don't really invest the necessary resources to societies, and this was a damage I believe neoliberalism did in a very big extent, the young people especially are not going to participate, abstention is going to rise, and those people that are at the extremes, they are going to take advantage of it. Especially we see that in the Netherlands right now, or in the US coming.
Yes, I agree with you that we need more democracy. I think that there is also rot seeping into the systems of democracy. Fully agreed. We also have to realize to a certain extent that more democracy perhaps also would mean, faster democracy and a different type of earnings model for politicians. And the problem with that from an organizational point of view, as with big companies that live long past their sell-by date, is that there is so much vested interest in a particular system at any point of time that there would be a lot of resistance against changing the system just because so many people benefit from it. That's for me as an economist, one of the fundamental insights which people don't often realize is that you can only really get change in a system if more people, if the vested interests are shifting. And there's no people fighting to maintain the system. And so this is always the fundamental challenge, that if a system works for certain people, even if it's a small minority, they will fight to keep it.
Yes, I agree with you. Wim, we're running out of time. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your new book coming on AI?
Yes, thank you for that. I can plug that, Alexandros. So hopefully by the end of May, June, there will be a new book out called Artificial Intelligence, Economic Perspectives and Models that I have co-authored with two of my good colleagues and friends, Thomas Gries and Nicola Dimitri, respectively from Paderborn University and Siena University. In this book, we take like the subtitle, we take a strong look from economics, and we ask what can economics as a science learn from artificial intelligence, and what can artificial intelligence researchers learn from economics as a science of sorts. And the unifying point that we take is decision-making theory. So we take the central challenge of artificial intelligence researchers, which are what kind of decision theory should our artificial intelligence use? And we say artificial intelligence researchers have used the central rational decision maker theory, expected utility theory, which is also what economics has been based on. So modern economics and artificial intelligence shares this common foundation of the rational decision maker, based on expected utility theory. Well, for humans, it is certainly. So we discussed the fact that humans don't act as this Homo Economicus. We are Homo sapiens, and we have bounded rationality, and we have all these cognitive, biases. And the behavioral economists have looked at all the ways in which we are predictably irrational, as they say. And so we say that this is this. But now, what artificial intelligence researchers are coming up with is saying, yeah, but we can now create this Homo Economicus. Right, all these foibles that humans have in terms of their irrationality and cognitive biases, we can get rid of that in an artificial intelligence, which basically then creates the real economic agent, as lives in the neoclassical traditional economic models, and we go out from that to explore, what kind of, how can both of the fields learn from one another, what's wrong with these models, how can we learn it much better, and what are the implications if you think about that. One good implication, though, I can say is that the fears of existential threats are much less, because the living in the expected utility framework world, is kind of like a small world. Savage in the 1960s, in his very influential statistics books, talk about big worlds and small worlds. And these are like small world problems that the AIs are facing. They are narrow AIs in small worlds. They're not going to jump out into the big world and be able to change things in the big world. So we don't have to be so much afraid of models that are based on these type of utility models of AI. So we look at that, and then the second thing that we do is we look at artificial intelligence in long-run economic growth. So how can we think about AI? Will it lead to greater inequality, and why? And if this greater inequality is there, will it lead to decrease in productivity and growth? And this is indeed what we find. So we model the Silicon Valley model of growth, where the owners of the AI technology get progressively larger and larger profits, and this just means that the total consumption in the economy then decline, and then we're back in a consumption-constrained world where there is low economic growth but high profits and high inequality. So we show how that can actually happen. Then we ask, we examine through game theory what happens if there is a race for artificial general intelligence. Who will win such a race? And we show that it's unlikely that more than 4 or 5 companies can really partake in such a race, because it's really expensive, innovation, because you don't know what you will get. So if you think about an innovation context, it becomes really expensive. And so we predict that if you keep an eye on the big players, you should be able to monitor whether they are progressing closer to a type of artificial general intelligence. And then we end in the book, coming then closer to your questions about the ethics. We look at the long run, if there is an artificial general intelligence, and how that should evolve, and how to keep track on that. And we go even beyond that into even a type of a quasi science fiction scenario where we ask ourselves, what does artificial intelligence tells us about the Fermi paradox? So the Fermi paradox is, that in
where is everybody?
Post, where is everyone? He asked, referring to the fact that there's no other signs even remotely in the universe, with all its stars and planets, of any other civilizations or life even outside of the planet Earth. So he said, according to just basic calculations, on the age of the universe, the universe and our galaxy should be teeming with techno-signatures of other aliens, but we don't find it. And so we raise the possibility that it could be that likely aliens that we will ever meet or is out there will be artificial intelligences. And that these artificial intelligences, may be engaging in remote observations and in ways that we don't fathom. But that the best chances of perhaps finding them and dealing with them would be to build our own artificial general intelligence. And we speculate then, about how such an artificial general intelligence could actually perhaps be, in a dark forest universe, a better guarantee of humanity's survival than without such an artificial general intelligence. So
you believe we can tame such kind of intelligence?
Yes, probably. So I think it's unlikely, that if there is ever indications of a technological civilization that has gone through what's called the great filter, so technological progress can be a great filter that kills off civilizations. They just live for a brief time and then they are killed by their own technology. This is why we don't see any of them out there. They've all killed themselves. But if some civilization survives that and becomes, spreading through the universe, it will likely do so through artificial intelligence. It's not so likely, I think, for biological entities to travel interstellar space. It will likely be AIs and artificial general intelligences also to harness, the energy of stars that will possibly be needed. So we should get ready to either find artificial general intelligences, or, if that, how are we going to deal with that? We would be, I think, in a better position to create our own artificial general intelligence.
I'm not so sure that we are going to be around to observe that.
Probably not. I stress that these are very speculative, discussions. but it also touches upon, the economics of space, of civilization to space, because, from my point of looking at economic growth and the future of civilization, clearly, if we are bounded to one planet, there are planetary boundaries, and we can only grow so much within one planet. So if we are to survive over the long run, maybe, we will become spacefaring. But again, looking at the economics of that, we haven't done so much at all, and also how to deal with the threat of potential foreign, extraterrestrial civilizations. We have no idea. And so we try for the first time to apply some kind of economic thinking, also from game theory and also from looking at the cost. And I must say, at the moment, I'm quite pessimistic, to be honest. I don't think that humanity, as far as I look at the economics and the technology that's now available, that we will likely in time become a spacefaring nation. I think Musk's ideals of going to Mars is completely fanciful. It will not happen for a very, very long time. And it may even be, in the long run future, be extremely unlikely for us to become spacefaring colonizers. Rather, we may become internal and develop, in cyberspace, some artificial virtual reality in which we are going to, go into
the Matrix.
Isolate our planet, make it invisible from the outside so nobody can disturb us ever. And then we just, go down into our own creations, our own simulations. Maybe we even simulate universes if we ever are technologically advanced. But these are all science fiction things of thinking about the future, which comes back to your question, are we optimistic or not? And I try to tell my students, use science fiction prototyping to think about the future, because we can play in the future, quite freely, to come up with different scenarios and in a kind of like a harmless way. But then we can think about, what do we learn from these scenarios, these narratives, these stories that we make up from science fiction? And they can be useful, also from the ethics. Remember the 3 laws of robotics that people are basically derived a lot of AI ethics from, comes from Isaac Asimov's novel, I, Robot. So a lot of our current ways in which we handle also the ethics and development of AI comes from, thinking a little bit about science fiction prototyping. So I like that kind of approach for stimulating creativity and innovation, realizing, of course, that it's all kind of like science fiction and storytelling.
Science fiction is a part of science. Actually, I've been dealing with futures analysis for the last 10 years of my professional life. And this is what we actually did. We created scenario and then we assessed them comparatively to each other.
Yeah.
This is a very scientific method when it comes to analyzing the futures. Well, at least we don't have a better tool at our hands right now.
No.
Maybe artificial intelligence is going to help us with that also.
Yeah.
Wim, thank you very much for your time. It is a fascinating discussion. I'm looking forward for your new book. Maybe we can dive into it more deeply when it's going to get published. But let's speak regularly. I really enjoyed this conversation, and you have so much to teach us to the world.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. I loved talking to you. Looking forward to doing it again in future. Excellent.
Yes, the Metacrisis is going to stick around, so we will have plenty to discuss.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much also. See you again.
Thanks, Alexandros. See you again. Bye-bye.
Bye. So this was my conversation with Wim Naudé, an accomplished professor, an intriguing figure with ecological, planetary, and even, as we have heard, galactic inquiries. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and please subscribe to the channel to stay tuned with more conversation to come, and see you next time. Bye for now.